Computer. Okay. Okay. All right. So thank you guys so much for coming. So first of all, just a little intro. We're trying to, so I see many familiar faces and we kind of chatted about who everyone was here so far, but I'm trying to make this a monthly thing, at least during the school year. Where we're and the beauty of the world we're in right now is just connecting clinicians from all over the state and all over the region. So certainly happy to see people from the Treasure Valley joining, previous graduates, people currently in the program. So we're hoping to make this beneficial for all, connecting with students and providers and all of that. So if people are super interested, I'm always looking for potential speakers, topics, ideas. So certainly let me know. You have my email address is on the flyer on the Facebook event that I create, whichever way you saw it. So today we are talking all things fieldwork. So I am very fortunate to have Katie Canavan here. So she can wave, hello. So she is the academic fieldwork coordinator in the Master's OT program here at Idaho State. I'm the academic fieldwork coordinator in the OT assistant program. So Katie and I go back and forth many, many times, helping one another out, especially in these times. So really, we want to start by talking just about general tips for people. I think we hear a lot of times, people are unsure about students, or they've had a negative experience with students, or, they're worried about the burden of work with students. So our goal, I guess, today is to kind of, debunk some of the myths, answer any questions, provide resources to really make it a good experience on all ends for the students as well as for the clinicians. Because I'm hoping, and Katie's probably hoping, that when we send students, it's a mutually beneficial relationship is ultimately our goal. So I think I had a couple. I wanted to start just with some resources. So I'm going to share my screen, and then certainly this is super low key. Please interject if you have questions or clarifications, or if you want to take it a certain way, because this is all about you guys. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see which. Okay, so first I wanted to go to AOTA. So if you're an AOTA member, they have a ton of really great resources, particularly this position paper, which I have in my fieldwork manual. So there's a lot of different things. So particularly this one, as far as guidelines for the fieldwork experience, I can open it. I mean, it's kind of lengthy, but this is something that, I'm not going to read verbatim, but it kind of describes expectations of fieldwork students, our outcomes, fieldwork educator preparation. So AOTA has already done a lot for us as far as if I'm a new clinician or this is my first time ever taking a student, how can I prepare? And I have a lot of educators that reach out to me, and I imagine Katie would agree, as far as that is part of our job, is giving you the resources, helping you feel comfortable, answering any questions, to make sure that you're on the right track, or you're in a position to competently and confidently take on a level 2 fieldwork student. And I'm focusing most of this on level 2s. Level 1s just really vary. I call those active observations. So those are basically a student getting their feet wet in a clinical environment or with a certain population. So I'm focusing on the level 2s, where the ultimate outcome is that student becomes, entry level, and it's their last step prior to taking their boards exam, prior to, becoming a licensed professional and, maintaining employment in whatever setting.
Hey, Brittany.
Yes.
What's the date on this one? Like, I know we have a copy in our manual. I just want to make sure it hasn't been updated since then.
So let me see if it's all the way at the bottom. Last updated January 2013. And so that's where I was interested, because if I switch over here, to my manual. So those of you that have had OT assistant students, sorry, I need to move this. I hand out my manual, which has, ooh, sorry, I'm going to make you guys sick for a second. I'll get lost in here a little bit. I have a section in my manual. Ooh, if I can find it. Okay, here we go. Fieldwork Educator resources. So that's a really good point because I was like, I wonder if that has been updated for a while because I think I have some, I'll come back to this, but I have.
So Brittany, you're only sharing the one page if you think, so we're not seeing the back and forth. We just see the one from AOTA, just so you
Oh,
know.
you don't see. Oh, weird. Okay.
Because it only shares the one screen that you identify it to share.
Oh, I thought it just went where I went.
No.
Here you go. Can you see this one now?
Yes.
Well, then I wasn't making you sick. Here you go. Okay, so thank you. So Fieldwork Educator resources. So here, different areas. And again, I can copy and paste this to anybody or send my manual to anybody. And Katie, do you guys have a manual, I'm assuming?
We have a student manual. I just took over this position officially this summer and really not until December.
Right.
So this was actually on my list of things to ask Kim a question about, but Amanda, you might be able to help you out. Have you ever been given a manual about taking students from ISU, the OT program? Okay. So we have a student manual. It sounds like we don't have an manual.
So we can always collaborate on that as well.
And I think we typically would send essentially the student manual to the fieldwork educators. So it was isn't that right, Brittany? It's the same thing. We just send it to the educators.
Yes, exactly. So my students have access to this. So I have a student section. I have a like program policies. So if anyone had questions about, I think it explains my level 1s and my level 2s, but then I have a specific fieldwork educator resource, which is what I'm on right now. So here I have the supervision and Medicare requirements. Let me see if that has a date because I printed that one out from AOTA. Oh no. Yeah. This one. Okay, so this one should be updated of 2018. And then I have the COE position paper.
Hey, Brittany.
Yes.
It says at the bottom of every page on there that it was updated January 2020.
Right. That's for my manual, not for particular. Yeah. Good catch though. So this one I believe is the same one of updated 2013, but let me go to the end and see. That was my big task last year in my position, was updating this document.
Brittany, I thought I saw it at the beginning, what you stated it as it being updated on 2018.
Yeah.
Almost at the beginning of this, yeah.
Yeah, so this one here, 2013, which is, it still coincides with what is on AOTA's website. So basically, if I go back to that page, this document is basically the same document I have. So if you're already an AOTA member, you have access to these resources, which I've just taken those resources. And if I have an educator that has questions, generally I send them, I have these PDFs saved too, so I could send that information. So I think those are helpful resources where AOTA is already trying to help our disciplines as far as giving them some direction. But I'm going to show you, so I'm going to go back to my, sorry, I had no idea that's how the share worked. So I'm learning. So I'm going to go back to my fieldwork manual because each program, I think I would strongly recommend, no matter who or what program you're getting students from, I think this is something when I was taking students, I didn't know that people, I knew, but I didn't know that people in my position, Katie's position, I didn't know they existed. So if I had troubles, I knew they existed, but I didn't know what their job was or how much of a role they could take, especially when there's challenging situations. So I think that's where I would strongly recommend, no matter what school you're getting students from, to reach out to that academic fieldwork coordinator if there's any questions, and then seeing if they have any type of manual or resources, because each program should, as far as kind of information that digs a little deeper in, here's what my viewpoint is on these level 1 or level 2 field works. Here's the specific objectives that we have as a program for this field work, which that's a huge A-code accreditation standard for our programs, is making sure our clinical educators and our students and me, us as the program, making sure we're all on the same page. So that's where I have kind of the layout here in my section 2. As far as our fieldwork progression, it states our objectives, and then it goes into any policies and procedures. If they have a question on dress code and professionalism or absences, attendance, grading and scoring, all of that stuff. But then if I go to 34, I want to, oh, what page is this? I should stay on this page. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, because I think this is one thing here. Again, I think we got this from another program and then tweaked it and adjusted it for our program. And for the OTA program, we have 8-week rotations. So I think generally people find this natural progression, but I think that can be a hard thing for an educator of where should someone be. And so that's where I have this kind of weekly progression that kind of bullet points, maybe some things that should be happening in each week or each progression. So by week 3 here for an OTA rotation, which is 8 weeks, not 12 weeks, which is the MOT level 2 fieldwork. But by week 3, we're almost halfway. They should be at 25% of the caseload, with obviously still supervision or guidance and supervision from their supervisor. So I like to do fieldwork site visits, which are all virtual right now. But I like to do my site visits kind of halfway through, because one of the big things that I talk about is that progression of supervision. Because I think it's either, the newer therapists that haven't had as much experience, or maybe not new therapists, but like new supervision of student therapists. I think a hard thing with them is just knowing, are they giving enough control or enough of the reins over? But then we can also have the seasoned therapist that has a hard time, kind of pulling back, because they are very invested in their patients. They are, we all are passionate about what we're doing. So I think that's something I like to bring up, that conversation of where are we at in that progression of supervision, which we'll talk about just specific Medicare and insurance guidelines, because obviously that's going to dictate, can I be in the therapy office while my down in the gym? I'm getting in. Hello? Do you guys hear the echo? Okay, I was like, I think that's it. Okay, sweet, we're back. Okay, so I think that's something that a lot of clinicians struggle with, or I think it's a good conversation of, one, what are our regulations? Because if I have a Medicare B patient, I believe that is, they need to be line of sight, and I shouldn't be in the therapy office while my student is treating down in the gym. So sorry, iPhone 4, I keep muting you because I'm getting an echo. But at the same time, can that supervisor be, maybe at a desk away from the patient or something like that, to give that student the opportunity to be more independent, to have that client really looking to the student, to be answering the tough questions and developing that rapport as that supervisor, or as the person guiding the treatment, as that professional that has the answers. It also takes away that safety net for the student of, I panic and I look to my fieldwork educator. So I think that's obviously it's something with the fieldwork educators and specific to your site and specific to your, your insurance companies and reimbursement models and all of that. But having those conversations of, I don't, this is a more complex case, so I'm going to be a little bit closer. Or do you have any questions? Tell me your plan. I'm going to sit across the gym. Certainly come and get me if you have questions. Or obviously me as the educator, I'm probably paying attention so I can give them feedback on their documentation and know what was going on in the session to be able to provide that constructive criticism or areas for improvement, or here's a really good thing that you did or whatever. I can still give that feedback, but I'm not in there jumping in and interjecting and then kind of taking away from the rapport that my student is trying to develop when I don't really need to be there. I'm just an involved clinician like we all are, and I enjoy my job and I have a hard time backing off. So you can kind of see, obviously, then we're progressing to 50%, to 75%. Some cases, so week 7, I was like, why did that stop? Here's week 8. Some places never get to a full caseload. So I think that's something that really depends on your site, depends on the complexity of your caseload, your individual, instructor or fieldwork educator discretion, all of those things. And that's something like if you had any troubles or whatever, you could talk to me about it. But I like to bring that up during my site visits as well as, are we progressing in a way where this student is entry level? And another resource that I have, because I've had some various conversations on what is entry level, so like a home health setting, for example, is it, anyone work in home health? It's super challenging. I mean, with right now doing everything on a tablet and trying to do, what's that term? Point of care documentation. Is that it, Joanne?
Yeah, point of care.
And I'm sure like skilled nursing or other settings are maybe trying to do this as well, where point of care documentation, seasoned clinicians, are we struggling with that out there? That's a hard skill for a student to really be fully competent in. So it's the conversation of that I have with my educators, or I encourage the educators to have with the students, or to talk with their colleagues or their managers or whatever. What is the expectation? I know the new grads that I've helped mentor in the past, documentation, time management, and getting everything done in their assigned 8 hours is usually pretty challenging. So we know that the learning curve continues into employment. So trying to figure out where is that line in the sand as far as a student, what is reasonable for entry level status. And that's where, particularly in home health, where doing point of care documentation on a tablet like that, I've had students struggle with that in the past, where it makes sense because me as a PRN home health therapist, I struggle with that. So I've had that discussion of, what are we seeing as far as improvement of documentation and understanding of the different sections and billable with skilled need and all of that stuff. Are they showing progress in that? That's the foundation of the documentation. That to me is entry level versus, mastering that site specific needs.
It goes back to entry level in documentation. Can the student write a decent SOAP note that describes and demonstrates skill, but is it something that they can navigate into that point of care documentation? Is that the hallmark for entry level? And coming from our program, it's more, can they document the skill and give a good picture of what that treatment session was, maybe on a piece of paper, and then the clinician can translate that into the point of care documentation or something like that. Those are good conversations to have with us, because entry level is not necessarily what you would say is a month into a new program onboarding level.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And I think this,
Brittany.
yeah.
So I just have a question. So obviously, I haven't had level 2s and I'm just a first year, but so with the second years to get to that entry level therapist, is there occasions or situations where they get to the end of that full weeks, but the coordinator doesn't feel like they're able to become like an actual OT or like an actual OTA, like what do they do then? Do they just sit down and have a conversation about it, or do you do clinicals over?
So this is a great segue because, I mean, so there are situations where a student is struggling or a student isn't, sorry, I'm trying to
At the pace that the site is hoping that they would be.
Yeah.
There's questions about their competency at that level.
So let me move this again. You guys can still see my screen, correct?
And Kirsty, there's definitely a conversation that should be happening. It should never be a surprise to the student at any point in time that you're not where you need to be.
Yeah, and I would think that throughout, like, especially level 2, we have that communication with the therapist and the coordinator of being like, oh, you're doing really well, or like, here's like things that you could work on, type things.
Yes. So I'm trying to find who.
And just to add to that, it shouldn't be a surprise to the fieldwork coordinator if the facility has a concern about your competency, or you might not be considered entry level, or there's a concern about whether you would pass at midterm or final. That should be, the fieldwork educator should be speaking with you as a student, and then hopefully they're reaching out to either Brittany or myself. And if they're not, or in addition to the fieldwork educator reaching out to Brittany or myself, hopefully the student is reaching out to us as well, so that we can help facilitate conversations, we can help learning plans, and we can make it successful if it is going to be successful for the student.
Yes.
And identify those barriers. So I think that there's a form that I used when I was in clinical practice and had students, and I was kind of told, you know, this is more important if you're having a student that's struggling, where it's like we're thinking about a paper trail, you know, where I have things in writing. It's very clear between me and the student. I've discussed kind of my expectations, or I've set specific goals for next week or goals for the midterm or whatever, where this form, you know, so that's another thing during my site visits. I like to talk about, you know, are you guys meeting regularly? How is your communication? Because every fieldwork educator is different. You know, I had it built in. I was in a acute rehab setting, but a neurological rehab setting where it's a pretty challenging rotation. I also had the fortune of being able to build in weekly and request a block in my schedule so that me and my student could go over something every, you know, for 30 minutes every Friday or whatever. So I liked using these forms. Not everyone has the ability to, or not everyone feels the need to use this form, but it's just, the biggest thing is clear expectations between the fieldwork educator and the student. And so that's where we can talk about, you know, here's some strength areas, here's where we really need to focus. Here's something where I have concerns about. I mean, and that's where I think as fieldwork educators, we, you know, I look at myself, you know, 7 years ago where, you know, I struggled with this more of like sugarcoating growth areas, or when should they pass, when should they not pass, or, you know, identifying those things. And I think taking multiple students and all of that is helpful, but also thinking about, will this person be a great representation of your program? Is this person, or of our profession? Is this person a candidate for hiring? Which that's a tricky one, because that's not always, it's not like this is an extended interview trial process. And if they're not hireable, that means they're not entry level, because students can have you know, they can have a niche in a different setting, but they can still pass a fieldwork setting that maybe isn't exactly their specialty or their passion area or their niche. Katie, is this where you wanted to maybe jump in and talk about one of the things that you mentioned on your email about, more so about, you know, this can be very fruitful for potential facilities that are looking to hire, but it's certainly not something, you know, that the success of their fieldwork hinges on their hireability or their potential employment.
Absolutely. So we actually ran into this situation, this scenario within the MOT program within the last month. I had a student reach out to me and say, Katie, I want to change where my level 2 fieldwork is going to be starting at the end of March. And she requested a meeting, and we had a Zoom meeting and sat down. And she said, well, I had a fieldwork educator tell me that I need to come do my level 2 fieldwork at their facility so that when I'm done, I've already had my on the job training because she's offered me a position. And I said, whoa, let's back up a couple steps. We talked about some ethical concerns. We talked about just having your fieldwork evaluation tied to employment is just not a comfortable thing. It's not comfortable for me as the fieldwork educator at ISU, and it shouldn't be comfortable for the clinical director or the student. We never want our students' performance to be tied with employment. I did say to the student, look, you've never done a fieldwork in this setting. How do you know that you even like the population? And what if you get there and you don't like the population? So you say, hey, I don't want to work here. And then we would hope OTs who are filling out a fieldwork performance evaluation would never do this, but we know that we're human also. What if that fieldwork educator was like, well, I'm going to be marking them down now because they're not coming to work for me. It's a sticky situation. AOTA has some pretty clear guidance about this. And I believe Joanne, Brittany, and myself will all be the first ones to tell you, never have fieldwork tied with employment. You're welcome to talk to someone. If your fieldwork educator says, hey, we have an open position, you should apply. You could say, thank you for thinking of me. I will definitely keep that in mind, but please don't apply or please don't encourage students to apply until the fieldwork performance evaluation has been completed. Please do not interview a student, or as a student, please do not interview at your fieldwork placement until your fieldwork is completed, because things could get sticky and uncomfortable real quick.
Yeah, and I think that's good to kind of emphasize, because a lot of people do get employment opportunities from their fieldwork. So it can be a beautiful thing, but we want to just minimize any potential, unethical or tricky situations on both parties. So I do think that's completely fair. If you're wrapping up your fieldwork, you love that site, to start for students to start having that discussion, and vice versa, but making those plans once that's completed is definitely a good recommendation. So I guess I wanted to talk about challenging students. So I think, because I think that's, one of the hardest parts about taking a student is it going to be a good student, or is it going to be a challenging student? And for those of you that are students, we're doing our darndest on the academic side to make sure, and this is something that my job, I love the part that I get to talk with my fieldwork educators about, give us feedback on our program, give us areas we can improve, are our students ready, so we're really trying as a program, and ISU in its entirety with its OT and OTA programs, there is that emphasis of, we want quality clinicians out there, so it's that communication. So students do not feel like this is, oh, we're doom and gloom and you're all going to fail, because that's not the case. But the reality is that sometimes, as a clinician taking a student, my normal workflow is disrupted. So I always think of it or describe it, or, my experience when I had students was, the work is front loaded, but it's rewarding work. It reminds us of our foundation. It challenges us to kind of review maybe some of the why behind some of the patterns we've established over the years. So it keeps us fresh. It keeps us excited, and we get to pass that on to somebody, which I think is really rewarding. But there is front loaded work. But then we do our diligence, and as we saw from that kind of tentative schedule, they're taking over, and the back end is less work. I have a fieldwork educator that's a previous coworker of mine that I love, and she's amazing. she's like, oh, I guess I'll take another student, but I get so bored, because she has great students and she's able to, yes, front load it. Sorry, I'm gonna sneeze. But it pays off at the end, and she can shape that person and that student. And at the end, it does kind of even out where the burden on the clinician is less. But there are those, challenges where someone's struggling, somebody's not catching up on to maybe my feedback, and that's where I think being really clear, so again, I think if there's a student that's struggling with something, because I've heard feedback from fieldwork educators, this is what my expectation was, and I'm not seeing the student implement those growth areas or focus areas, or they're not making progress towards those goals. So that's where, if I'm seeing, if we're getting week after week and I keep saying, hey, you need to proofread your documentation, or you need to do this on a Word document to spell check, but the student seems to be, this is a reality. A lot of people. And Karen, I never heard that from your fieldwork educator. But if I'm hearing that time and time again, that's frustrating for a fieldwork educator, as far as how do I get progress when this student isn't taking this and ingraining this? So that's where I think, having that concrete, hopefully it wouldn't take week after week, because I can say goals for next week is, that I only have to do occasional corrections on grammar because you've utilized compensatory strategies for spell check or something like that. Where I'm giving them something pretty concrete to address something that has been a barrier, or you're consistently not having a backup plan when your intervention idea doesn't work out how you thought it would, and now you look to me for a backup plan. So my goal for next week, or the focus area, is to maybe I give them an assignment to list out all the barriers and list out potential interventions. So they have 4 or 5 interventions listed for each barrier, and they can pull that sheet out. This is something I tell all my students, because a fieldwork educator of mine had me do it. And it's so important, where it's hard for a student to have this, huge toolkit of ideas. But if we give that to them as homework, they can have that written down, and they've done the cognitive process of working through that to address your specific goal. And if they're not doing it, then we can take this a next step, or another step further. And I don't think I have an example. Oh, look at that, I do. So a learning contract. So this is where, if there's something that we're identifying week after week, or we already have an idea of like, this is substandard from the get-go, like this needs improvement, because this is, we have a lot of work to do to get to a passing rate at midterm or at the final. This is where I would encourage a fieldwork educator to reach out. Well, 1, to discuss that with the student, and then 2, to initiate discussing that with the student and with me or Katie or the academic fieldwork coordinator of the program. Because this is where chances are, we as academic fieldwork coordinators have to comply with FERPA. I don't even know what that stands for, but it's the student version of HIPAA. So we cannot disclose things without the student's permission. So there may be things where, oh, I know they're going to struggle in this area, or I'm concerned about this, but I can't bring that up if the student doesn't give me permission. But I've been working with this student for the last X amount of years. I've gotten to know this student and their strength areas and areas that they can compensate for, maybe these potentially weak areas. And that's where bringing us in and potentially looking at a learning contract, which is kind of that next step, of, hey, this really needs to change, or this was a problem area that is going to compromise your passing. And it just gets all 3 of us, the fieldwork educator, the academic fieldwork coordinator, and the student on the same page. And so our template here, problem identification and specific examples. This is not the sugarcoating or make them read between the lines. This is trying to be as specific and direct, because we need to see objective performance improvements in order to determine potential for passing or potential for progress, potential for success. So we could take that a step further. Why is this a problem? You know, hey, your notes are not satisfactory. They're not showing skilled need or skilled interventions, which is leading to problems with getting reimbursed. You know, so you're not showing that medical necessity, and this is not at the standard that our facility requires. And there's potential compromise in actual reimbursement. You know, so hey, that's why that's a problem. This is a big deal for you to be an entry level and to be a successful clinician when you graduate. So then kind of going in here, what is the expected goal? So we're all exposed as OT practitioners, we're all exposed to goals of some level, whether we're writing the goals or whether we're reading the goals all the time and we have insight into the goals. And this is where I think we should use our OT skill sets to be specific, to be measurable, to make sure we're all on the same page. And so here, look at that. The form already goes into that of how will this be measured if I haven't already stated it up here. Strategies to achieve the goal. So this is that, you know, how can we bridge the gap? Maybe I'm giving you more reading assignments at home. Maybe you know, depending on the certain problem, maybe you need to practice transfer training, or you need to look through AOTA's resources on, you know, ethics, or, you know, just different things depending on what the problem area is. So this is where, you know, we as faculty, you know, I'm not a proponent for just tons of busy work, you know, but at the same time, there are things that a fieldwork educator can assign, and I would strongly encourage that they assign these things if it's designed to meet an objective, or if there is a lack, you know, like a hand therapy clinic. Hey, you know, that's a specialty area. You better brief up on your anatomy of the lower, you know, of the, what I'm going to say, the lower quadrant, but of the arm and the hand, you know, so different things where this is an expectation and you are behind in knowing all of those muscles and how that's impacted and splinting and whatever is specific to the site. So here's an activity designed to bring you up to speed, and you're showing some lack right now. You know, so I think there are different forms out there that every, you know, not every circumstance requires a learning contract, things like that. But I think it can be really helpful of just bringing all of us together, getting something concrete, because if they continue to fall short, then you as the fieldwork educator are justified in why that student wouldn't pass. And then me as the academic fieldwork coordinator is on the same page of, I see where this performance is lacking, which helps us as a program, but then helps me, like, how do I counsel? How do I guide? What can I do on my end to help improve this student's performance, or support you as the fieldwork educator when a student should not pass, and why they were, where they were lacking, and how we need to help them improve. Anyone, Katie, Joanne, either of you want to add anything there?
The only thing I would add is just how we, in the past, it's, there's negotiations also where maybe we need to extend the field work for a week or two because they were slow in the beginning, and at midterm they weren't at the pace that they needed to be. So that is something that can be negotiated also.
Absolutely. And there are students that we send out to field work and we expect them to have no problem at all. And there's a surprise. Our student, especially our students this year and the students that will be sending out next year, they have never had their hands on someone who is not normal. And that's because of COVID and our COVID restrictions. So there may be students that we expect to fly through field work and something happens and they don't, and they're delayed. Please never feel like, as a fieldwork educator, Brittany and I aren't telling you the whole truth about our student. She is right, we cannot disclose things related to FERPA, but we are also expecting that we're sending students that are ready for fieldwork. And once in a while, someone surprises us and they need a little bit of remediation, and that's okay, but just keep us in the loop also.
And I guess I should open it right now. Does anyone, you know, that has had students, or anyone want to problem solve? Like, challenging situations they've run into, or anyone want to burning questions at this point? Hopefully I'm not scaring everyone from taking students, because students can be really wonderful.
So I have a question.
Go ahead, Lisa.
So, I think there are situations where, I mean, I feel like I've got a good relationship going on with my students, but I know that there's some things that they're probably not comfortable telling me. And I guess maybe could you just speak to how can we work that? Like, can I hope that they're talking with you guys and you guys communicate with me? I don't want to sit here paranoid that I don't have all the information, but I really do want to make sure that the student has a good experience, that I'm doing what I need to do, and that they feel free to talk to me about those. But I know that it's a weird situation for them too.
I can use a personal experience because I had a couple students when I was in the field that I struggled with as a fieldwork educator, and the students struggled. And so again, remember, I was like, I didn't even know that I could have reached out to this person of that program that these students came from. But what I did do, because I was in a bigger hospital system, so we had a student coordinator. So I did reach out to that student coordinator. So I had actually two students that for separate reasons, they ended up disclosing to me, so one of them disclosed she was tested for a learning disability. They thought dyslexia, but she never ended up getting formally diagnosed with anything. So she could never get accommodations because her documentation was a struggle. Her grammar, doing all of that on the computer was a struggle. So it was something that I was never briefed on. Now that I'm in my position now, I know that it was because of FERPA. But that student eventually disclosed that to me. And then we were able to gauge progress and talk about specific strategies. Before I understood what the fieldwork coordinator was able to do, I kind of was like, that would have been nice to know, so I try to, with our students, it's certainly not my decision, but we try to discuss these issues because we get to know our students, where I try to discuss those things of, this is your call to discuss with your fieldwork educator if you feel comfortable. And you certainly don't have to feel comfortable, or you certainly don't have to disclose things, but hopefully if there's a problem, we can all meet together. So I think that's something where fieldwork educators, we're all in this profession. We work with people that have limitations, or we can identify compensatory strategies. That's how our brains work. So I think opening those conversations, that hopefully you're trusting that us fieldwork coordinators and program faculty are already starting that process. And then you as the fieldwork educator could kind of complement, hey, I'm seeing something, how would you rate your writing skills? Or, I'm noticing, do you feel like doing it electronically versus writing, where are your strength areas? Kind of opening the door for a student to potentially disclose something if they are having struggles or if they have had struggles in the past. But showing that it's a non-judgmental, it's a safe place, and you're willing to work with them. So that student, we talked about her documentation and her grammar. I got to a point because once I knew, I was able to say, like, all right, your goal this next week is to have less than 2 or 3 corrections on your documentation. And so then we talked about, here's some strategies, and she was a whiz on a computer. So she had all these shortcuts and all these things where she was, and we talked about that for her future employment of, you're going to have to figure something out to be successful because this is a medical document, and et cetera, et cetera. So that totally did not answer your question, but I think it at least, well, go ahead, was there?
Well, I just wanted to jump in and
please.
I think before we send our students out, we really talk to them about how to talk to your fieldwork educator and communication. And if sometimes you don't jive, and to please come to us and help us hear what you're saying. And then I will help give you words to go back so that it can come from you first. and you can try to work it out amongst yourselves. And if that doesn't work, then we can always, whether it's Brittany or myself as the program coordinator, can kind of step in and have a three-way with the student and the fieldwork educator and the program. But we try to set our students up with tools for communication to kind of handle those episodes also.
Can I
And for the master,
Is
Erin,
it okay if I jump in? I just wanted to,
Aaron, you got muted.
okay, can you
There you
hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to jump in and say, one of my fieldwork educators, the one in Coeur d'Alene, one thing, she's taken a lot of students before, so she really is dialed in with teaching students. And from the very start, she wanted to know how I felt that I learned best. So that question that she posed to me, you know, are you a visual learner? Are you someone that prefers to read things and learn that way? Would you like me close by all the time? Would you like me further away? I think how she presented herself allowed us to really open up that communication between both of us, and it worked very well. So I just wanted to say that helped me out a lot.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. So Karen is a class of 2020, so a new graduate out there in the field working and licensed in Idaho and doing awesome. So great. Thank you so much for that feedback, Karen.
so Lisa, for the MOT program, we also ask our students to check in with us. This first rotation that they're out, we're expecting a weekly email sometime during the week. They're sending us an email, how things are going, challenges, successes, things that their goals for the week. And at the same time, they all have my cell phone number, and all of my fieldwork educators have or will have my cell phone number. And it is not all that uncommon that we get a phone call I got one on a Monday at like 6:30 p.m. Student super upset because things just weren't going right. And we always advocate that our student needs to take the initiative and they need to bring up a concern first. I am not going to go to a fieldwork educator and say my student is concerned about this until I know that the student has done it first. That's part of life. That's part of being an adult and working in a clinical practice. Our student needs to advocate for themselves, because if they can't advocate for themselves, how can they advocate for their clients? But I got a phone call, Katie, I cannot do this. I have tried. This is everything that I have tried. At that point, I am happy to either step in. In this case, it was something that I needed to step in and take care of. And I did that evening. Or I will reach out for a meeting with the student and the fieldwork educator to help take the problem and work through it. But Lisa, our students, not only should they be communicating with you, they should be communicating with us often, so that we can help them through concerns that they have that they might be afraid to bring up to you.
Yeah. I think another thing too, so kind of tag teaming off of what Joanne said, and Lisa, you're a perfect example of, you do interviews for your level 2 students, where I think that that's a smart thing. Not that I want all of my fieldwork sites to do interviews, but at the same time, I think if there's a concern from a site or for a fieldwork educator where, you know, I haven't had a student before, or I've had a bad experience with a student, I'm hesitant towards doing this again. I think a nice way of bridging that gap is doing an interview and just getting to know that student that is coming your way. Because yeah, like, okay, I was talking to one of our adjuncts she works in home health, and, you know, taking a student in home health, they are riding in your car with you, you know, that whole day. Not that a clinic, you're very much further apart, but you know, it makes a difference if you feel like you can get along with that person. Now, I think that's reality also, that we don't always get to pick who we're around all the time, and we have dynamics that are more challenging and whatnot that we all have to work through, and again, that's part of life. But I think that's something where we probably hear all the time, that it's just a culture that doesn't take students at this facility. And I just wonder why. And I think part of that is, a negative experience that made it more challenging or made me less resistant to taking another student. And that's where I think to kind of ease yourself back into it, or if it is a clinic that, there's two therapists and you share the same office and you're really in each other's space all the time, you can certainly have that interview to make sure you and the student are going to seem to jive. Because as a fieldwork educator, when I run out of sites and in times of COVID, I don't always get to cherry pick who my students go with. But I think that's something where I want the student to be with someone that they're going to do well with too. So I respect that coming from sites. And I try to facilitate that when I can on my end, knowing where the student is going to thrive, what that personality is like. But again, we don't always get to choose that too. But I think that can kind of help, maybe that's something in that pre-fieldwork interview process of, like Karen had just said, of talking, how do you learn best? What kind of supervision do you thrive in, or are you expecting, and kind of discuss your philosophies as a fieldwork educator too. That can just hopefully get both parties excited about this is going to be a good fit, and I'm looking forward to being a part of this learning process.
I know I have a couple MOT academic or fieldwork educators on here tonight besides Lisa. For my students who are starting at the end of March or beginning of April, I sent connection emails today to all of the fieldwork educators and the students. Our expectation is that the fieldwork educator will reach out, or the student will reach out and make the initial contact with the fieldwork educator. But if you have concerns from that email, if you just want to get to know the student a little bit more, it is completely okay for you to say, hey, thanks for reaching out. Do you think you could set up a time before you start to come see our clinic, or can we jump on a Zoom meeting so that we can talk? Because it's a lot easier to feel comfortable and confident taking a student if you've seen them, if you have a face with a name and you know who's going to be walking in that day one. And trust me, as the student, they feel a lot more confident too.
I was gonna say, like, when you go into a clinic and you have this educated OT, it's very scary to be like, oh, like I can talk to him. But I feel like getting on that same connection of, I'm just here to help you and I'm just here to educate you as well. And then also OTs can be educated by us. And I think that's really important for them and us to know of. They don't have to always have the answer. We can have some answers as well.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's really good. And like criticism, it's not always going to be bad and it's not always going to be good, but taking that criticism and being like, I'm here to help you and help you become a better clinician, than just taking it and being like, well, I'm just bad, then I'm not going to do anything from it.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And that kind of is a nice segue. We'll come back to questions kind of at the end as far as opening it up, because I know we've talked about a bunch of things, but did I miss in the beginning, Amanda, are you a graduate of the MOT program? No, okay, you're a fieldwork educator.
No, I'm a transplant. I graduated from USC and came here by way of Utah, so I did a lot of work with the University of Utah.
Okay, so we have one graduate. Katie, do you have any MOT graduates on here? Or I guess you guys would know. Well, I have one graduate. So Karen, why don't you take the floor? Because we do have a couple students on here and I want to make this beneficial for them too. But so you've already shared a couple good insights into how to kind of feel more comfortable, but I think talk a little bit more about just what recommendations do you have for success from the student perspective?
Okay, I think for me, I like Katie, that you had mentioned having that connection maybe through Zoom so that you can see your student beforehand. I think everybody's so used to Zoom by now that that should be a comfortable thing for both parties. So I think that's a really good idea with that. And for us as students to, yes, once we reach out to our fieldwork educator to make sure we make that connection before we go off to fieldwork. Find out what they want us to come in our, have in our pockets for sure. Anything extra that they want us to study up on before we arrive, and do your work and be prepared to show up. My first one was in the OT. She's a hand specialist. So I had to really brush up on more hand things before I even went. So I think that's real important. The papers that you shared, Brittany, were extremely helpful for both my field works. They didn't always remember to say, hey, let's sit down and look over your paper and fill out your goals for next week. So it was helpful for me to have those in my pocket and say, hey, can we fill this out this week? I want to know what I need to know for next week. What goals do you have for me for next week? So all that information is a good thing to bring with you as well. The other one too, that you had the weekly ones for the percentage of where your caseload should be.
Yep.
Was extremely helpful too. I looked at that constantly. So
that's really good feedback for me, because it's like, okay, yeah, some fieldwork educators are just all over the place, or they're so busy that they don't think of it. Where if you're the student, so recognizing that in yourself of, I want that feedback, I'm not getting as, specific examples as I'm hoping for, so you could initiate that process. I think that's a really good, important point.
Right. That's about it.
Yeah. So Karen survived.
Yeah, I think just being open with your fieldwork educator, just really communicating with them. And I just begged, what else do you want me to learn? What else should I be doing better? It's important for us as students to take that on and not expect them to always be telling us, oh, I think you're not doing that right. So the communication is key.
Yeah. And then, so like what Kirsty was kind of talking about, where, expecting growth on both ends. I mean, we talk about this in our program about, you're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to get feedback to help you grow, but then you also get to provide feedback too, which is helping you grow as a future professional. So I think we try to give those clear expectations of, constructive criticism. I mean, we all can improve. We talk about that and we hound that in documentation on, there's red marks all over documentation, but we are all striving to improve as clinicians out there. I mean, you guys are probably nodding in agreement of, yeah, I remember we had a new grad that got hired and I was her mentor. And so I'm reading, she was on a temp license. So I was reading her notes and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to work on my notes. Like she's the new grad, fresh from school. And it was helping me like go back to some of those roots, or I really like that phrase, or, whatever, where we can all continue to grow. And that's the beauty of our profession. But knowing that as a student of, you have a lot of growing to do. I mean, you have all the academic part, but man, the growing is just starting when you get into your field work. So being that sponge, being that advocate, but then expecting that growth can be uncomfortable too, but it's positive growth. Good. So I'll open up. Anyone have any specific questions? I mean, I know we didn't really talk about specifics with supervision. I know that comes up quite a bit. I'm certainly not the expert, but I have a couple of pamphlets here and I've answered a few questions. I think, going to IBOL for whatever state you're in, but Idaho, going to our licensing board, looking at our practice act, that can give us a lot of like definitions of supervision, frequency, things like that. I think too, there's a lot, for me anyway, I'm an OT, but I'm working in the OT assistant program, where when I was working as an OT, I never really thought about having an OT assistant as a student. But here I'm advocating it every day, where OTs can supervise OTAs, but if you're from a program that maybe hasn't had a lot of exposure to OTAs, or you've previously worked in settings where you don't have, I don't utilize OTAs all the time. So what does that relationship look like? Or what are the differences in the scope of practices? There's a lot of information on AOTA. I would be happy to set up a Zoom, or I can send you some resources that I have, because I think that's one of the things where we get creative of, an OT that's in an acute care setting has taken an OTA student and it still has gone really well, where how can you utilize that student to expand treatment options when you're swamped with evals, or how can that student participate in an eval within their scope of practice, so they're still getting the intervention exposure, but they're not obviously stepping out of their scope of practice and doing more than they should, but they're not totally disengaged with an OT that has 6 evals on their schedule that day. So really finding the happy balance between the two. But then also I think Katie and I have plans at some point to really talk about too, where how can an OT student and an OTA student work together, potentially with the same supervisor? That's happening more and more. And, we have goals as our programs to further improve and continue to reinforce how do those two not disciplines, but two clinicians in our discipline interact together. And that can certainly start in the fieldwork setting. We're trying to start it in the academic side, but it could potentially make a cool dynamic with 2 level 2s, or a level 2 OT student and a level 1 OTA student, or being creative with how that's happening. So Katie and I are planning on putting our heads together and just maybe giving fieldwork sites more direction on how this could work. Lisa, do you have anything on that? Because have you done some of that before?
I was just going to say last year was so weird with everything anyway, but I had an MOT student from another program in Missouri and one of your OTA students, and it really worked well. It was, both students were really happy about getting that exposure to the other. And then I'll tell you, so Mizzou they are just starting an OTA program in their college, and so they are very interested in that type of collaboration too. And I think we're just going to see more and more of that in our profession.
And I think one cool thing, because I remember when I had students, every single time, because we had one coda that I didn't really work with a ton. And on the fieldwork, the AOTA fieldwork performance evaluation, there's a section for OT students on collaboration with OTAs. And I remember every time, not applicable, or, I'll pretend to be your OTA, that's not accurate. So I think there's more and more, that's coming directly from AOTA, and something that we should be reinforcing while they're on their fieldwork is, what is that collaboration and what does that look like? And hopefully we can facilitate that more. But I think from maybe just the first impression is it can be a beautiful thing. And we are here to help guide that and facilitate that, to not make it a cumbersome, burdensome thing. Because I think it sounds daunting, like, you want me to take 2 students, but how can that process really be complementary to the 2 students without compromising, obviously, either of their educations?
And on that end too, I currently have an MOT student, and she is, we were looking over that section on her fieldwork form, and my OTAs that work for me are awesome about, helping and turning it into a teaching experience. So the student's learning to supervise, but the seasoned OTA student or OTAs are being great to help them understand what that relationship is. So I think it's really a good thing to involve all of that staffing on how they can work together.
Yeah.
Yes, I have placements who say, oh, I don't have a full-time OT anymore, so I can't take your OT student. And I say, well, do you have an OT assistant? And they say yes. And I said, well, we can share the supervision responsibilities between the OT and the OT assistant for the MOT student as well. And I have a few students who kind of balked at that at first, like, I can't be supervised by an OT assistant. I'm an OT student. And I say, absolutely, you can. You need to learn the treatment skills as well. And so we have like a 50-50 split between the occupational therapist to make sure that our OT students are getting getting the evaluation tools that they need. And then the other 50% of the time they're with an OT assistant who, quite frankly, might be a better treating therapist than I am, because in my experience, I worked on acute care for 3 years. All I was used for was evaluations. I never saw the same patient twice unless it was a reevaluation. So if a student had been with me, they would never have intervention skills.
Yeah, that's a cool point. So I'll open it up. Again, you guys have my email address. Please reach out, contact me about anything. I mean, whether it's students or fieldwork related, journal club related, you want to volunteer to be a speaker. I know some people are getting tired of hearing me talk. But again, I don't want to take too much of your time, but if there's any burning questions or other related questions, unrelated questions, the floor is yours.
I'm also open if anyone has any OT specific fieldwork questions, feel free to send me an email. I'll put it in the chat. Send me an email. We can do a Zoom meeting, anything you guys need. Brittany and I are here to support the fieldwork educators out in the clinic.
I'm also new to joining the continuing ed committee for IOTA. And so would you guys be interested? Do you think it'd be good to have more sessions, CE sessions on field work for Idaho OT related things? I feel like it's always a good thing.
And that's a really good point. I'm going to share my screen again because let's see if I can find it. Ooh, Fieldwork Educator Certificate Workshop. So we were, Joanne, that's what you guys did, right?
We did.
Yeah, so we were super lucky. I wasn't in my position, but I was a clinician in the community. So I was fortunate enough to attend. But I feel like there are different things, more specialized training, but certainly that's another goal of Katie and mine, is to where we actually have plans on how can we or what can we present at IOTA in future year or years for fieldwork specific preparedness. So that is coming. But there is that other resource through AOTA, which was a pretty cool resource to just maybe, they went into significant detail on problem students, or not problem students, I'm sorry to call them that, so challenging situations with students and how do we, tackle that, or what are some, there was just a lot of different training tools. So it is a cool resource if you're like, man, I really want to take students, but I am so intimidated and this was helpful, but man, it only, brushed the tip of the surface. There are other resources out there, and maybe that's something we can look at getting to Idaho again.
Yep. It's only money, and we can certainly look at sponsoring it again.
We have a PT faculty member in Meridian who is a trainer for the PT side of fieldwork education, and he is always open to having OT students sit in on his trainings. He has one at the beginning of May. If there are any clinicians who would like to sit in on his, send me an email and I will get you connected to Tyler.
That's cool.
And it counts for CEUs, and ISU covers the cost.
And I should put a little plug here. That's super awesome. So definitely take advantage. But another pro of taking a student is, per what AOTA, 1 week of fieldwork is 1 CEU. So a 12-week MOT student, that's 12 CEUs. So in times that are maybe challenging to get CEUs, or reimbursement or whatever through your site is minimal, this is an easy way of getting CEUs, and it really does. You earn it because it does bring you back to, you have that student, they could go do research, they should be doing a project, they could do a journal club in your clinic. So again, I'm not promoting busy work, but that's not busy work. That is being a good steward of our profession and utilizing someone who is coming from that academic side. So use your students to, bring excitement and bring back, evidence-based practice and digging in the research, use their journal access. But then in conjunction to that, you get rewarded with CEUs, which is pretty awesome. So a little plug on why you should take students. Cool. Well, I will call this meeting adjourned then. So we'll plan something, the first of the month. Certainly send me emails or I'll stay on Zoom if you want to stay on for a little bit. I know 6:30 can be a hard time. I guess while I have a crew of people here, is 7 o'clock easier or is 6:30 a good time? Or it's all challenging, so we'll make it work.
I think it's just a matter of setting up a time. I mean,
Okay.
people are going to have challenges, so just,
Yeah. I like that we're recording it, so you can go find us on, it's ISU OTA on YouTube. So I'll post this on YouTube so you can share it with people or other clinicians or bring it to your manager and let's make, student-friendly cultures at your workplaces. But again, reach out if you have a burning topic that maybe you don't want to present, but you want to hear about it. Or you have a special skill set and you would love to share it. Or you found an awesome article. I would love to get more involvement, especially across the entire state, multiple disciplines disciplines too, but like practice settings represented, trying to get this taking off and getting it where it's worth our time and it's actually some really productive gathering for us OTs and OTAs and other disciplines across the state. So thank you all for being here.
Yeah, to volunteer to start one of these, you don't have to be an expert in what it is. You could find an article, be interested in an article and facilitate the conversation.
Yeah.
So
AOTA has a whole forum that can help you with the facilitation of the conversation. Yeah. Our MOT students have to do it every semester.
I know I'm going to start pulling from them here soon.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to stop recording. But you guys can